Hello, everyone, and welcome to NetApp On Air. We had a little loop button there that we forgot to uncheck. That happens when we're doing things live. It's a good time. Welcome to the show, everybody. We are back after an amazing show last week. We had a massive launch event launching the new A-Series platforms. Yes, we were just highlighting the C-Series. We do not have the video yet for the A-Series, but we'll have that for the upcoming episodes for sure. Still working on getting some of that stuff. But yes, we are back here in the Data Center Dude Studios, talking to you guys about NetApp. And we definitely wanted to connect with you guys on some of the things in this and upcoming episodes that were covered in the launch last week. We have new hardware platforms to talk about, both AFF A-Series and Storage Grid. Both of those are on the books already. We've got new security pieces to talk about. That's on the books already. And of course, we can't talk about new hardware systems without talking about ONTAP and the latest version of it and the latest enhancements and all of that good stuff. And we've got a returning guest today to talk to you about that. Before we get into that, make sure you're joining us in Discord. That is the place to be if you want to keep up with episodes here on Air, have follow-up conversations, any of that kind of stuff after the show. That is where the after party's at. You can come hang out with us 24/7 over in Discord, regardless of where you are in the world. But it is the central destination for all things NetApp community. You can find us over there. My guest today needs no introduction. He joined us last week. He's one of the most popular guests on our show for over the last couple of years as we've been doing this. He's arguably one of the most sought-after individuals and the subject matter expertise that he brings to the table is Mr. Keith Aasen. Keith, how you doing, sir? Welcome back to the show.
I'm good, Nick. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, weren't you just here like a week ago?
Oh, it's nice. It's nice. And then I kind of wandered off in the woods, had a nice week off, and now back at it. So it's good.
Right. So how was your break, first and foremost?
Break was good. Break was good. Nice to get out and not think tech for a while, but it's also nice to get back. Yeah. I'm glad everybody got really excited about the launch. It's something we've been working really hard to get ready for, and it feels good to kind of get that out there now, and everybody can start sort of using that tech.
Fantastic. Well, I wore my Powered by ONTAP shirt today because we're going to be talking about ONTAP. I wanted to ask you a few lead-up questions before we dive into the deep techie GUI details. I've seen a change really since probably ONTAP 9.10. I can feel something has changed. The speed at which we release things, and the frequency at which we release things has increased. There are more things going into each of those releases. Yes, some of them are staple ONTAP things that we've known and loved, but I've seen more net new things happening over the last 5 to 6 releases than I maybe ever have. Can you help me, as someone who's been doing this for a while, help me understand, from your perspective as a product manager for this stuff, how does that happen? What accelerates those things? Is technology driving the bus here? Or is this just a constant, a hamster wheel of innovation that we're on, that we just keep pushing this stuff out?
I think there's been a fundamental change. You're right. I think 9.10 is probably the right point where that sort of inflection changed. And one of the big things that I think morphed was, NetApp's always been a really hardcore engineering company, and we build some amazing stuff. But sometimes we would get a little too inward looking, right? We were sort of building things because they were pretty cool and they were something that we were interested in building. But we had a really fundamental shift several years ago to be a lot more outward in, right? Really make sure we look at, what are customers struggling with? What are their pain points? How is this changing? What are some things that they're wrestling with, not just today, but upcoming? And I think we placed some pretty big bets. If you're always trying to code to today's problem, you're never going to be there, right? By the time you get that problem solved, somebody else has beat you to the punch. You really have to get better about predicting, where is the industry going? Where are the problems going to be a couple of years out? And I think we made some big bets, and I think they're paying off right now.
Yeah, it feels like we're at this inflection point of ONTAP, where it's gotten to this safe spot where it's constantly iterating on some of the good things, but yet we're still introducing new stuff. I look at ARP and how that's improving and evolving, and because of the way that ransomware has become so prolific in the industry. and I look at some of the other things that continue to evolve, but a lot of them are just staple ONTAP stuff that we've known and loved for decades now, and we continue to find new ways to leverage them, new ways to build solutions and reference architectures around them. So I love where it's at right now. It's at this kind of just peaceful place where if I were running it as a customer, I would feel just stable and secure and just confident, have this level of confidence in it. I can't say that throughout all of history about ONTAP. Like, there were times when I was just like, ooh! Of course, right? Everybody's had those moments, but we're kind of in a sweet spot right now. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree, and not only looking at it from a feature function standpoint, which is kind of feel like you're coming at, but also behind the scenes, think about how ONTAP is so tightly integrated with the hardware we run it on. But at the same time, we're also able to run it on these engineered appliances. We're able to run it, as a virtual machine on VMware and KVM. We're able to run it in cloud infrastructure. We're able to run it as cloud first-party services. And so there's been a massive amount of work optimizing ONTAP for all those different environments at the same time, and not just like make it work, but like optimize it so it thrives in those other environments. And so I agree. I think the fact that as a customer right now, a lot of them, don't necessarily know where things are living. There's some that are like, yeah, I'm on-prem, or some that, yeah, I'm in the cloud. But I think for most customers, it's a little bit of like, yeah, I got some things in the cloud and some things on-prem, and things are shifting around. I think the nice thing about having ONTAP being anywhere is they can be confident that they have this constant set of data features and protection, regardless of where the data is supposed to be or needs to be.
Yeah, when we first started doing the cloud stuff, I was trying to get this phrase over the hump called ONTAP Everywhere. And that was what I would use to pitch to customers. Well, last week at Converge, I saw somebody had stickers made that said that on it. And I went,
We've done it.
Yes! We got it over the hump. People have started adopting it. So that's really the crux of this whole thing. And really what you were just outlining is this ONTAP Everywhere mantra. And that's one of the beauties of the portability of it, is that once ONTAP is ONTAP is ONTAP, and it is so versatile, it can run on just about anything. And so, but the functionality and everything remains the same within it, right? Yeah. Regardless of where it's deployed, regardless of how it's configured under the covers.
Now we optimize each one, right? And
yeah,
even on the hardware appliances, we're optimizing C series for capacity flash as opposed to performance. But yeah, it is optimized for each of those individual environments, and but you have that consistency of protection and management that sits over top of it.
Oh, a good question just came in before we get into the new business. I definitely wanted to pull this up because this is one of my lines of thought as well. Thank you for the great comment and question here, Darth. Do the things, when we deploy things to cloud and maybe they require some different things architecturally, does that often drive innovation back into the kind of engineered systems side of things that we might adopt, things that we learned by deploying it in, non-traditional spaces like the cloud? Do we learn lessons from that and then apply that to some of the ways that we bring those back on-prem?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is the same code base. But having said it, you can imagine how fast things change in the cloud. It's not like you kind of optimize ONTAP for, cloud, and you're like, whew, we're done, right?
Yeah.
Cloud is evolving all the time, right? New infrastructure, new machine types, new services to integrate with. And so that's where, the pace of innovation on the cloud side continues to be, it's a lot of work still, right? We're constantly optimizing for those cloud environments. Typically, what's introduced in the cloud versions doesn't have a lot of relevance on-prem because it is usually that sort of optimization. But occasionally there are things, and then they find their way out, in the on-prem releases. So there's not usually, the second part of that question was, hey, can we make those versions available on-prem? There's not really any point. There's really typically nothing in there that would benefit on-prem. Yeah. But the on-prem features do find their way, specifically targeted for that twice-a-year release.
Nice. Thanks again for the question, Dar. That's a great talking point, is how a lot of that stuff could be managed on a day-to-day basis from a release cycle point of view. What do you think, Keith? Should we dive in? Should we talk about? Let me kick this off a different way. You've been on the show now 3 times for 3 different releases. I think it was 12, 13, and 14. Yep. That we've talked about over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. what's new? Like as far as like in between 9.12 and 9, obviously we've got iterative updates and things like that for each of the major features and sub products built into ONTAP. But like what's the 9.15 page? Just give me the Keith Aasen perspective of like what drove the 9.15 payload. What really were the big bullet things that we wanted to talk about today? Just to give people a bit of a teaser up front summary of what we're going to go over.
Sure. I'd say priorities. First priority was supporting the new hardware, right? The new AFF lines or A series line. That's a tremendous amount of engineering effort right there alone, right? And not only because it's new infrastructure, but it has to be highly performant, highly stable, highly resilient. So that was the top priority, and so that was a lot of work that went into that.
And that was, for the record, that was the first time we really refreshed that line fully since I believe 2016, maybe 2017.
Yeah, they definitely were getting. We'd done spot releases, right? We the 400 was newer, but they were sort of incremental. This is the first. It's kind of the first time that we did the whole range at the same time as well. Right?
We went out and built a Lamborghini as well with an A900 a couple years ago.
Exactly.
As a bit of a one-off, right? Just to see if we could.
Well, what was really unique about this was there was a single design center across that, and we're going to get some benefits out of that. So that was the biggest lift. And then I'd say drop down behind that. Security is ongoing, right? That's a very, very high priority. And we're introducing some really interesting new concepts around security. We had Matt on last week, and Matt kind of deep dived into some of that. So security, I think, is a big one. And then we had a couple of heavy hitters. FlexCache is increasingly becoming a major focus as we're getting into this hybrid environment of, not only some things on-prem, some things in the cloud, but also, more and more things are working globally. And FlexCache is we're pretty excited about a major deliverable there. So, and I guess business resiliency, right? Is that's the other one is what we're doing in the SAN space with the ASA, and protecting highly available block-based environments. That was another big payload. We kind of previewed that in 14, but getting that out and sort of ready for general availability was another big payload.
Nice. Yeah, and looking at, and guys, in case you missed anything from last week, they're available online on YouTube, right here on the YouTube channel. You can watch the announcement video completely over again to go over the new A-series lineups and all the other Cyber Vault and all of the other stuff that's part of that launch. But we've also got an on-demand video recording of I think it was about 45 minutes, the conversation we had with yourself, with Matt Trudwin, with Chris Luth, and of course my lovely esteemed co-host, Mr. Jeff Baxter. But all of that's available for you guys in case you missed it last week for anything like that. So, yes, I want to make sure. Why is there a link going out? Oh, Drew's linking the shows from last week. Thank you, Drew. Sorry. Good looking out, Drew. Our esteemed producer behind the scenes, pulling levers. Posted links there in the chat for you guys for any of the shows that you wanted to see. Let's get into it, Keith. I'm going to pull the slides up here. Let me make sure they're on the right one. Yep. Okay. So obviously we need to talk about, with the new A series came some new technology. We're going to go super deep on the Intel QAT stuff that's part of that payload when I have the guys on. Guys, teaser here, June 5th. Mark your calendars. Chris Luth and Mr. Scott Bell will both be returning to the show to do a complete deep dive on the A70, A90, and A1K platforms and all of the hardware gooey goodness of all of it. QAT is a big part of that. And so, Keith, when you saw that, or when your team saw that, like, how are we going to take storage efficiency to the next level?
And let me even take a slight step back because sure. Previously, we had this, what you always want to deliver is the most storage efficiency you can with no impact to performance, right? And that's the ultimate goal. And so we had one method of compression that we could do in line without impacting performance. But we could get much greater levels of compression, but they did have an impact on performance. And so, we thought, well, that would actually be fine for cold data. Once the data kind of cools off, that's usually the perfect time. At that point, you're rarely going to access it. But it was a hard decision as a storage admin to make that decision. Well, what really defines cold data, and how do I actually set that? the awesome part of QAT is it's a hardware offload. We use it as part of the chipset, so it's not a card. It's nothing you need to add to these A series. It's just native on all of the new AFF A series platforms. And that hardware offload allows us to use the much more efficient compression with no performance impact. And so therefore it can be used on all data. And so we get a kind of a win-win-win, right? You get the better efficiency, you get no performance impact, and you get simpler management because there's no tuning, nothing to be set up, no choices to be made. So pretty exciting capability to have that embedded directly into the hardware platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it part of the die? Is it part of the processor? Is it like a Northbridge, Southbridge offload chip for? You said it was part of the chipset.
Sounds like a great question for Scott Bell and Chris Luth. As a software guy, I just know we have access to it and it's always there. So I don't know. And it's not a card. It's embedded in.
So I love the approach. I love the perspective of get the most storage efficiency without affecting performance. And it's probably a slider based on maybe the platform that you're doing it on or any of that kind of stuff. Like there's so many variables in there, distance and range to where your offload's going to be, or your secondary copy might be, or any of that kind of stuff comes into account. So what did we do? Where did we end up landing with QAT in mind and available to us? And what was the material difference between without QAT previously and now with?
So where we landed was, hey, we've got this hardware offload and it's there. Let's use it. So the idea was, let's use it for all data as we get data. So in other words, if you're snap mirroring data to one of these new AFF A series, that will be applied as the data is coming in via SnapMirror. If you're writing data from a client, the new compression is applied in line. If you do a vol move in the cluster, it's applied during the vol move. And the kicker, the one that's really, really, really exciting, is the fact that just by upgrading an existing system to one of these A series, your existing volumes as a background process, opportunistically, as the system has availability, will use that QAT to apply this compression to the existing data. And so, usually we introduce something like this, it's like, yeah, we get this better efficiency. It's on any data you write after the upgrade. No, we're going to do it on every piece of data that one of these new A series systems can actually touch. And so, the kicker is like, hey, upgrade to a new A series. Yeah, it's faster. It's got better throughput. Oh, and by the way, my existing data gets smaller, so I free up space on the media I already have. Like there's my.
Well, is this something that happens over time? Is this a first boot process kind of thing after the upgrade?
No, it'll happen. It'll happen over time. So as I said, it'll be opportunistic as the system has cycles and it has access to QAT. It'll do it behind the scenes. So again, we can dive and bring our friend Chris Hurley in, another regular guest on the show, to get more into the actual kind of background process. But the idea is, again, it does it opportunistically. So there's no performance overhead, nothing to monitor. It'll just over time, as the system soaks on the existing data, and of course you have things like snapshots that need to expire and roll off and free up that space. But over time, it will be applied on the existing data as well.
Fantastic. Is there any kind of metrics you can share with how fast that happens, or like what are some of the dependencies that might get in the way of that opportunistic, compaction or compression happening?
I don't have the exact one. It's very, very dependent on how busy the system is, and then of course the results vary as well. But as they mentioned in the launch, some of the data is much as 2.5 times. So, for example, we had a data set that was an Oracle database data set that. I think we were getting a 2.7 to 1 ratio before, like on an existing previous, and then after we'd applied the 9.15.1 code and moved the data onto a new A series. It was almost an 8 to 1 ratio on the same data, right, at rest. So that was 2.5 times was the reduction of the actual compression. So. Mileage will vary.
Let me repeat back what I said. So you said 2.5 to 1 up to 8 to 1.
Yep.
That's not messing around. That
nope.
is.
Now that was
That
one
is
data set.
that's some serious differences for you. Now, are there any unintended consequences of doing this kind of stuff? You mentioned like it's not meant to affect performance. It's going to happen in the background opportunistically. Like I'm looking for the blind spots here. As an admin and an engineer, I'm like, those you're throwing some fairy dust on me, and I'm not sure exactly like. Is this all just the magic of QAT, or is there some other secret sauce that we've baked into this?
Well, so the QAT is the enabler, right?
Yeah.
It's the that's the hardware capability. So ONTAP is sort of the magic sauce as far as using that particular hardware. You can't do it strictly hardware alone. So it's the two together, right? They have to be there. There's no gotcha. The only potential gotcha is, hey, if I apply this greater level of compression and I move it to a box that doesn't have QAT, well, isn't that a problem? Yeah, it could be, right? Because now that other box has to do that uncompression. So we do the same thing as data is being ingested as the data is being egressed. So as you move data off of one of the new A series that's got QAT, we'll also undo that compression. And what that means is there will be no performance impact where that data actually lands. The only gotcha is again that those greater efficiencies won't be realized on the other system. So that's a bit new. You'll have to kind of plan accordingly for that. But fairly soon, the whole portfolio will be refreshed with that. So there'll be less of an issue on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and I think as systems cycle out over the next year or so, naturally occurring refreshes happening over time, I think we see that becomes less and less of a talking point, 12 months from now.
Well, I can just imagine the conversations of like, hey, this data is pretty big. Let's maybe move it over to the new box because it's probably smaller over there. And then pretty soon it's like, well, I can't put anything more in the new box. Let's maybe buy some more new boxes, right, to do that.
Yeah. So. The other thing I'm thinking about is like, does this have downstream effects for backups, vaulting, and things like that? Does this have downstream for tape? Those are where my head's going. when I hear about this, because
it all depends on the format, right? If you're keeping it in native ONTAP format, no, it all works just as expected. If you're dumping it to a raw format, that all gets undone as we're taking it off anyway, so no change, right?
Yes,
it's all
all continues to work as expected.
Yeah. So this is one of those great features that's going to get big things with nothing you actually have to do. It just happens. Those are the best ones, right? There's no new settings, no choices to make, no configuration. It's just there.
It's really beautiful, and I'm looking at this from the context of we have been doing this for going on 20 years at best. That I can remember dedupe in like 2007.
Yeah.
When that was first coming out in ONTAP 7. Back when we still called it Data ONTAP.
Yeah,
and I'm trying to think of like just the trajectory and the growth of. I'm looking at the timeline of this of like introducing compression, continuing to make deduplication more efficient. Like there's this timeline over the last 20 years of doing this kind of stuff, and somehow, some way, we continue to find new ways to make the footprint smaller and smaller and smaller. And I'm constantly amazed by yourself and the ONTAP team of how from an engineering standpoint, we're continuing to do this 20 years later.
Well, I even zoom that out a little bit, Nick. Is our goal for every release, every version of ONTAP is every version of ONTAP should get faster, right? You should get better performance every version of ONTAP. Yeah. That alone is an ambitious goal to be able to continue to optimize code as you do that. Not to mention the fact that we're adding features as we do that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, we're gonna add capability and still make it faster in every single version, and better availability. Like it's a very ambitious goal, and it amazes me how we're able to continue to do that 20 years plus.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's genuinely impressive for any of the engineering folks watching.
Yes, exactly.
Bravo.
Exactly.
Bravo. All right, so let's kick the slide over here and talk about the next thing. Anything else to close out on storage efficiencies?
If we can go into more detail on the hardware, guys. If people have hardware questions, we can do that.
One of the more controversial ones I've heard about over the last couple of months probably is there's a little bit, and I'm hoping you can clear all of this up. So I'm kind of setting this up for a little bit. There's been some consternation about SnapMirror business continuity versus SnapMirror active sync. And correct me if I'm wrong, this was introduced 9.14.
It was done as a tech preview in 9.14. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
I think
we're basically just bringing it to GA at this point. Is that right?
Bring it to GA. Yeah, it was a tech preview. We had some limitations, but now it's going to be generally available. And part of what makes it GA is all the associated off-tap things work with it, right? So OTV and Snap Center, all that works with it. But back up a little bit. I think the part people get really excited about Active Sync, but I think the part that gets missed quite often is, we rebranded SnapMirror Business Continuity. So we had SnapMirror Business Continuity, which is still very viable as far as a configuration, which one site being active, second site being passive, with an automated failover. That still exists, but we rebranded it to ActiveSync. Now, normally, I hate rebrands, and I always, our friend Jeff, who was on last week, I was like, Jeff, why do we rename it? But actually, this one actually makes sense, because if we looked at SnapMirror, we had SnapMirror asynchronous. Okay, yeah, I can decipher from the name what that means. We had SnapMirror synchronous. Yep. Again, pretty straightforward. And then SnapMirror business continuity. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, it doesn't fit with the other
flashy marketing name.
Yeah, that was the outcome, but it wasn't really describing what was actually happening. So exactly. In this case, with SnapMirror Active Sync, well, we have the sync. So that's just like we're building off of SnapMirror Synchronous. We're adding the active, which basically means that the failover, the automated or the cutover of the applications from site to site is active. Right? That happens automatically. And also optionally, both sides are rewritable. And so it's an active deployment. So actually, from a naming standpoint, hey, that actually now makes sense that we have these three modes you can put SnapMirror in, and they build off of each other.
Interesting. Okay. So what's different now about Active Sync versus the things that we had before?
So previously, SnapMirror Business Continuity had the hooks to have a mediator and detect if an application's having a problem, an automated failover from one side to the other, right? So you'd resume communication, but you'd have an active site that would cut over to the other side. Now with Active Sync, what's changed is you can now optionally also turn it into active, which means the LUN is available, and this is for SAN only. The LUN is available on both sites being rewritable, and hosts connected to those sites write locally. So then the data is synchronously replicated either direction. Still have the
so it's bidirectional as well.
And it's bidirectional, which
I can't make that work in my head.
And again, it's metro cluster like, but again, you don't have cluster dependencies. So
how do you get past the epsilon? How do you get past the who wins?
Well, the mediator is sitting in the middle, right? So you have this mediator that's keeping track of things and making sure that you're not just in a split brain scenario. But the fact that I don't need to have like for like infrastructure. In other words, I might have a 2-node cluster on one side and a 6-node cluster on the other. Some of that kind of stuff hurts my brain as well, right? It doesn't have to be.
But it's all ONTAP at the end of the day. It's just about available resources to process data. So that I can get my head around. But keeping track with what belongs to who and where it was originally written, like the logging of that must be insane.
At a block level, yeah. Oh. Pretty stunning that it's still, I think back about, obviously the waffle that we use today, the write anywhere file that we use today is not the same file system we started 20 years ago. But the fact that it's evolved again to this state to have this capability is very, very, very.
Yeah, I think even Dave would agree this ain't your daddy's waffle.
Yep.
Or your granddaddy's waffle.
I had an opportunity to ask you mentioned about the storage efficiency. I had an opportunity to have a chat with Dave Hitz once, and I asked him about, hey, when you designed this, did you have the idea of like deduplication back then? And he's like, I had no idea what the idea of like removing duplicate blocks had never even crossed his mind. But he goes, don't think that the waffle I wrote or that they worked on was the same as it is now. It has evolved constantly, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm anxious to see how people use this. I think as someone who loves this kind of stuff, and especially So a lot of my background came from tier 1 applications. Oracle, Microsoft Exchange, and then we got into virtualization, and then so that's where my head goes whenever I hear this kind of stuff. SQL clusters, Oracle clustering, Exchange clusters, all of that stuff. So I look at this in the context of the example that's on the screen is using a VMware Stretch VMS data store. Okay, I can get my head around that because it's just virtual networking at the end of the day, and you're making smart of it. What I can't get my head around is the bidirectional kind of nature of it. And so theoretically, right, in theory, I could have a virtual machine whose VMDKs were on site A, but it was actually being hosted by B1 and B2 in that UCS chassis. Where's the latency going to start affecting things? So you get into some metro clustery kind of conversations with that kind of stuff. So that's really where I come down to, like, how do people decide whether they want to leverage SnapMirror ActiveSync, or do they just need to take the leap of faith and go full metro cluster?
So it's a great question. So and certainly doesn't mean metro cluster is going anywhere.
Oh no.
The perk of ActiveSync is it's done very granular, right? And if you think about an environment, if you have a big enough environment, as you mentioned, for one of those key applications that it demands its own storage cluster, metro cluster is probably your right choice because you're doing it at the cluster level. But I think a lot of customers have, the bulk of the masses of their applications, but they have a few crown jewels that are like, I've got this application, it doesn't need its own storage system, but it needs to be highly available. That's where ActiveSync absolutely shines, where I can have sort of the general populous VMs that have normal DR mechanisms. I have a few applications that absolutely have to be available. This is a great way of enabling it just for those few applications without having to set up a whole separate infrastructure for it.
I look at this as almost as but then I start, I'm trying to get my head around the difference between metro cluster and this, because in my head I'm going, this is more maybe an active passive setup versus the active nature that you can get from metro cluster. But no, at the end of the day, you could achieve similar things here. It would just be that bidirectional nature instead of maybe in parallel as you can get when you really push metro cluster out there. This is one I really need to spend some time on. This is one that I want to go make a separate video on it, just from an architecture perspective of the kind of things that your imagination could run wild building with this. I did notice SRM support for DR orchestration. I wanted to call that out because I think that's probably one of the highest use cases or most probable use cases we'll see something like this used for, is sort of a instant active passive cutover failover kind of situation. So if you've got VMs or applications or workloads stacks on side B and you're replicating that data back, you could just, SD-WAN over, or you could do something where you can flip over and do an immediate cutover with no disruption to end users. Like all of that stuff is huge, and I see it as being a part of this conversation.
Well, where that comes into play is you mentioned, so you are dealing with the latency. Everything that's written in one site needs to be written at the other site, right? So you are dealing with that latency, whatever you have between them. But where that comes into play is, say you have a site, a city where you have two data centers in the same city. So maybe you're 2-3 milliseconds between the two. You could have this set up between those two data centers. Now I have data center resiliency, but I also want to protect against, what if a whole city has some sort of a weather event or a power outage for the whole city. I want to then replicate those virtual machines to the other coast and use Site Recovery Manager for that. And so I have that ability. If I lose one data center on one side or the other, nothing changes. Everything just automatically recovers. But if I lose the whole city, then I initiate my DR mechanism with Site Recovery Manager, and I recover on the East Coast or West Coast.
Yeah, we used to do this. Yeah, 20 years ago, we would do local, campus, regional, local, campus, municipal, regional, national. Yep. And you would have to build out scenarios and run books for each of those, right? So I would call the one you were describing the citywide one, the good old smoking hole scenario, of just a meteor lands and it takes out the whole city. What do you do? And like that's where you start getting into East Coast, West Coast, or even multinational. You're getting into some really lengthy stuff. There were some stories a long time ago of when tsunamis happened and Fukushima was going on in Japan, and how things were replicated to both Europe and the United States, and how they were able to just continue running and things. And that was leveraging SnapMirror and SRM under the covers. Yep. So there's things like that happen out there in the world, and you got to plan for them. I see that this is going to be incredibly powerful for users, and I know people are upset at the branding change and the name change, and just try not to get too wrapped around the axle about that, because this is bringing some really cool functionality for you guys to take advantage of. We did have a question pop in. I'm going to pull the slides down real quick so we can see this. From Tobias over on YouTube, said, is that Flex group based, and can you explain how the interfaces are configured, like IP based and or SAN?
Yeah, for sure. So it's not Flex group based because it is SAN only. So those two are not compatible at this stage. So it's using regular Flex balls. And then you can configure the interfaces. Now, here's where, if you can pop the slide back up, here's where we can really bake your noodle, is the fact that on the slide right now, you see that those ESX hosts, like a look at host A1, A2, right? Right now, it shows a solid line local and a dotted line remote. That's what we refer to as uniform access, where those hosts would have access to both clusters. Part of something that's actually new in 9.15 as opposed to 9.14.1 is we now also support non-uniform access, which means that your ESX hosts only have local connectivity to their local cluster. So again, it could be fiber channel, it could be iSCSI, it doesn't really matter. But imagine that your vSphere hosts or your application server only sees the local ONTAP cluster. And so therefore, the only thing that spans between the two sites is the SnapMirror relationship, right? It doesn't even know about the other cluster in the other site. That's okay, because if something fails over, the other knows, so it's not even the same. It's the same LUN, but it's not the same iGroup at all, because they're completely different initiators, completely different hosts.
And for any sort of smoking hole scenario, we're depending on SRM or VMware's heartbeat to determine which volume they're pulling the data store from.
In this case, it's not SRM, it's VMware HA, right? It's a single VMware cluster, right? It's a regular HA.
It's just a stretch cluster. Yeah.
It's a stretch cluster, right? In a regular HA cluster, one host fails, VMware just automatically restarts those VMs on surviving hosts. It's the same thing here.
So when you configure this, is there anything special about the pack of interfaces that you use that have to be configured in order for SnapMirror ActiveSync to work over them? I know Tobias asked that specifically in his question. Is there any special ONTAP configuration that needs to happen to the specific interface? Like we have specialized metro cluster interfaces and FRUs, right? So there's, I'm looking at it from a context of, is there anything special we need to do to either a set of interfaces or some other configuration other than just go SnapMirror ActiveSync enable and we're done?
The metro cluster is a bit trickier because you're actually spanning the SVM across sites, and so it looks like the same storage. In this case here, they're presenting as completely different storage clusters, but happen to present the exact same LUN. So the answer is no. And the good news is inside, if you're using it for VMware, OTV takes care of all that for you. It'll just set this up for you. Now, there are some special things you need on the networking side for the virtual machines to be able to do that. Of course. Right? As you flip a VM from site to site, it doesn't re-IP itself. So you got to make sure that you can still get to the outside world where people get to it. There's some complexity there, but not really on how we present access to the actual LUNs themselves, which is pretty wild.
So from a solution standpoint, Tobias, hopefully that answered your question. If you have some follow-ups there, throw them in. We got to get going but I keep asking questions about this because this is the one I hear the questions about the most. Obviously, VMware is a very popular solution here, but where else do we see this? Do we see this in the kind of native tier 1 applications, the Oracles and the SQLs of the world?
Yeah, you hit it spot on. It's all of those, right? And it's really for any application that sort of has its own built-in availability, right? You need to have the ability that the application goes, oh, I've lost one of my nodes in the application. I'm going to recover somewhere else. And so, yeah, the ones you named all have that. That's the key one is it has to have that sort of ability to, within the application itself, to recognize that it's had a failure at one site and it should try to recover somewhere else.
Nice. One more quick question before we move on from Philippe is, in a 3-site scenario, A and B active, plus site C as DR. If A fails, do B and C keep on does B keep on replicating to C?
See,
Or is there some kind of epsilon takeover cascade that happens in a 3-site?
I am high confidence that the answer to that is yes, but I reserve my right to do a double check on that. But yes, I believe that's the case. When you set up SnapMirror ActiveSync, that relationship to Site C, I believe that is the case, that it will continue to replicate if you lose Site A.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for the comment there, Philippe. Let's kick over, guys. If you have any more questions about this kind of stuff, Keith and I both are in our Discord community constantly, and if Keith doesn't answer right away, I'll add him, I'll tag him, make sure he gets back to you guys. But come join us over there. ARP. I know we're going to have Matt on in a follow-up episode. We've got to talk about Cyber Vault as a part of the last week's launch announcement, but we cannot talk about current technology without talking about ransomware. Give me the high level without being Matt Trudwind.
Yeah, sounds good. I will.
about ARP and ONTAP.
I could not be Matt Trudwind. So high level. ONTAP 9.10 to ONTAP 9.14, we trained a highly effective model to detect ransomware in NAS file shares within ONTAP. So it does pattern recognition and file extension recognition to identify when ransomware is happening. It does it asynchronously, so it's outside the I/O path, so no performance impact. And it just does periodic sampling of, really it's based a lot around, a number of attributes. And one of them is file entropy. How are the files themselves being changed? But it was a very static model, but really effective. Yeah. Now, you would train it to start off with, but that was really adjusting its sensitivity level. So if you think about a model, you sort of, it's trained, and then you kind of tune the sensitivity to trigger. And that's what we would do in 9.10 to 9.14. Now in ONTAP 9.15.1, what's unique is we're introducing the model, but the model will actually continue to learn. So as it's running, as it has detections and you say, no, that's a false positive, or that is an attack, it continues to learn and adapt itself. So it's not a fixed model, it's still a fluid model. It continues to improve itself. And what that's done is it's not only increased its detection level, which is our detection level was already really high. It did improve that, but where we saw our biggest gains is it reduced the false positives. So every time you told it, no, that wasn't actually an attack, that was a false positive, it would adapt so that it wouldn't trigger on that same set of conditions again. And that's what you want, is you want to minimize that noise. So if something does trigger, you're not, you're ready to jump on it. You're not. So this really brought up both the precision. So we're not false positing, we're not false triggering, and it brought up the recall, which is actually, we're actually detecting when an attack is really occurring. And both of those are now over 99%.
Yeah, it's not a Chicken Little or a Cry Wolf kind of scenario where you kind of get numb to the alerts.
Exactly.
So what's different about? So I know that previous to 9.15, you had to go into System Manager or the CLI, and you had to enable on a volume by volume basis, I believe, the enable ARP stuff. Has that gotten more efficient? Is it still kind of a 30+ day process to do that? The learning, to walk me through how that operates differently, if at all, in 9.15.
Sure. So initially we had that. You turned it on. We need to give it 30 days, and then you flip it into production mode where it actually
right.
So that's two administrator touches. We didn't want to do that. So actually in 9.14 is when we did away with that, so that when you turn it on, it goes into learning mode. But once it has a pretty high level of confidence of its sensitivity, it'll automatically go into production mode. So you don't need to touch it twice. And that's the same thing in 9.15. Is once you enable this, it basically stays in learning mode, but is in production mode at the same time. It'll continue to learn and evolve.
Yeah, just because it kicks over to production mode doesn't mean it's not continually ingesting new behaviors, right?
Yeah, and you're every time you sort of reward it, that was an attack, or shake your finger at it, no, that was false positive, it'll adapt and get better, right? It continues to.
You naughty ARP.
So it's that idea of it's not a static model. The other thing that we did, which I'm very excited for, is we made it modular out of ONTAP. So one of the questions came up was, hey, can I upgrade this model? And previously is like, no, we upgraded the model whenever you did an ONTAP upgrade. Now, we didn't actually have to change our model very much because it was so comprehensive. And there's new flavors of ransomware attack, but they still all sort of work in the same fashion. But we have made this modular now, so if the need arose, we could issue a new model that you could bring in independent of upgrading ONTAP, which is great. So something radical changed. We could retrain a model in our labs, publish that, and you could bring that in without having to go through your normal change process of doing an ONTAP upgrade.
That's fantastic. How do we do that? Well, that's a question for another time. I might ask you that one offline without being live on the internet.
And this is tech preview, right? So watch for this in the future to be GA in a future version of ONTAP.
Yeah, I can see where this could go. The amount of data that we have available to us via auto supports, via documentation, via manuals and TRs and best practices and all of that stuff that have been written over the decades and generated over the decades, there is a massive amount of learning that could be taken into account there as far as what is legitimate information, what is legitimate blocks, what is not going to trigger these false flags, and what could be a legitimate attack above and beyond what the blacklists, file extensions are and kind of the baseline of that kind of stuff. I can't wait for us to really be able to start taking advantage of some of that stuff, but I also want to be cognizant of make sure that we're doing it the right way. Because if you take a model and you drop it onto 10 different customer systems, there might be 10 different reactions to it from those systems. So those are the things I would be curious about, like how we would control that kind of stuff. But that's a deeper conversation.
This is sort of your last defense, right? Is ideally you catch any sort of an attack or vulnerability before the attack starts. Because this you still have to wait for the attack to start before it triggers, right? So this is your emergency parachute. Hopefully you've caught things before it gets to it, right? Yeah. So hopefully this never should have to trigger, but if it does, it's your safety net.
Yeah, awesome. More on ARP soon, guys. We're gonna have Matt Trudwin come on and talk some Cyber Vault and the newest updates to ARP.
I won't steal his thunder on this one either. Then.
Okay. So let's gloss over this one and what it is, because it's got a big fancy name. But what is it actually doing under the covers?
Another tech preview, but what we're trying to do here is have ONTAP make real-time dynamic choices about how it should respond to commands that could result in data loss or data destruction or data exfiltration based on a trust score. So think about all the things that an administrator does and attributes of an administrator, like where are they coming in from? Have we seen the device that the administrator is connecting to us from before? Have we seen that SSH key? What time of day is it? Is this administrator doing something different than they normally do? Is this abnormal behavior? And based on that trust score, do you allow the command? Do you maybe challenge the administrator to ask them to re-enter a multi-factor token or re-enter their password? Or do you block them altogether and go, nah, this feels off, please try again later. And so this is early stages. It's a tech preview, but it's an ability to have ONTAP to sort of build and maintain think of it like a credit score, but it's a trust score for individual administrators on the system itself.
I took Cisco to task last year for making people have to learn Python in order to renew their CCNP. I feel like we're getting into this world, and I blame virtualization on this at the end of the day. We're getting into this world where people can't be specialized anymore. And I feel like so storage admins now have to learn IDS, IDP, or IDS, IPS sort of principles and things like that. They have to be security engineers, networking security engineers, for access control and things like this. But the cloud has also driven that as well. Everybody's had to learn how to navigate the mess that AWS IAM is. But I feel, are we now asking storage administrators to be security engineers as well? I guess in a way we've always asked them to be stewards of data regardless.
Yeah, I think what this is optional, and the idea here is you are able to kind of define within the framework what you would deem suspicious. So what things should the framework look at, right? If if a storage admin suddenly connects with a laptop that he's never connected to before, maybe suspicious, right? That's odd, right? If he suddenly is working with storage volumes, this is down the road, working with storage volumes he's never worked with before, right? In an SVM he doesn't typically normally manage. Is that suspicious?
Yeah,
maybe, right? And so this has some of that fluidity to identify that. The ultimate goal is to identify a bad actor or compromised set of credentials, right? Something that has suddenly changed outside of their normal day-to-day behavior. How can we respond and try to defend with that?
Yeah, and a lot of these are defined by regulatory agencies, especially in the public side of the world.
Yep.
For any publicly traded company or anybody that might have, these kinds of auditors coming in every 6 months asking you to check and verify things, then they're going to have these templates that they have to apply to all systems. So giving this kind of stuff is probably already mandated top down, but now we give them the ability to apply those same sorts of regulatory definitions to storage systems and to capabilities to people that are accessing that system at any given time. Where I see people getting in trouble with this, honestly, is with service accounts. One way or the other. There's going to be a service account somewhere that has either way too much permissions or not enough permissions to do the job that it exists for in the first place. The service account, I mean. That's where this stuff gets kind of tricky. If it's just individuals, yeah, you can regulate, allow, or deny all of those all day. But people get in trouble with this kind of stuff with service accounts. If you manage these kinds of things on a day-to-day, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But
for sure. And the idea of this was to be a little more flexible or a little more dynamic, which is where the name came from, versus multi-min verify, which I think we're going to talk about here next.
Yes.
Multi-min verify is much more rigid, and it's really targeted at customers who absolutely positively say, here's something that I want no single administrator to do. And that is great from a regulatory standpoint. Pretty unfortunate for things like automation or maybe sometimes just for an individual admin trying to get something done in a short window. And so what this is trying to do is trying to be a softer version of that, to say, hey, normally you should be able to do your job without any sort of impedance. If you do something that's a little bit unusual, we may inconvenience you by asking you to re-enter a token or a password. If you do something really off the rails or enough things add up, we may pump the brakes to say, whoa, let's stop what's happening here because it seems just too suspicious. So it sort of tries to be that more dynamic or more intelligent real-time decision letting ONTAP make, rather than sort of a rigid yes or no type of scenario.
Yeah, between this and Cyber Vault and the ARP enhancements and stuff, like, I've got a big show to look forward to with Matt.
Sure.
I definitely want to get into that. You mentioned the captain's missile key scenario, as I like to refer to it. I still want to make the kind of meme video of remaking Crimson Tide and that scene between Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman, but over deleting a volume. Like, I still want to do something fun like that. Nobody steal my idea, but I think that's exactly what this is. There is no better definition of it. If you've seen the movie Crimson Tide, there is someone that is trying to delete something or make some kind of change, but then there is an XO that is challenging them because the order is not clear. You have to have the approval of both of them. Now, there's not as much gravity to it as launching a nuclear attack. But at the same time, this is exactly the principle behind it, is making sure that there is that double verification. And I think it's honestly one of the best things we've come up with in a long time.
And when we first introduced it in 9.11, we were very focused on your description of deleting data or exfiltrating data.
Right.
What we're expanding on in 15 are really took a hard look at activities that a bad actor would do ahead of an attack. So what are some things you would do to grease the skid? Like, if you just go in guns a-blazing, you're probably going to get caught pretty fast, shut down, right? But if you can get into the cluster and say, well, let's redirect the logs, so we can do that. Let's maybe drop down, maybe our alerting levels. Let's turn off some security measures. You can really, soften the security ahead of an actual attack. And so these are things that typically once you set them, when you set up a cluster, you probably don't want to mess with them again. And this is a way of locking them down and saying, yeah, I can change them if I have to, but I need a couple of administrators to approve that, yeah, it is the right thing to do is to redirect those logs from this point to that point, or drop an alert level, or change an encryption setting.
It's a system level change control, a change management sort of thing, and I really dig that. I think it takes the ticketing nature out of the boredom of change management. Like this is it's I like this so much because it forces teams to work together. It forces people to agree, or at least collaborate to find a common ground on how to do something the right way. These kinds of things are often like misunderstood and overlooked, but the secondary effects that it can have on a team of practitioners day to day doing just general operations is massive. Giving them levels of confidence, trust in each other, knowing who to go. You got to find out who to go talk to because you need to know who has the second key. Like there's all kinds of secondary effects that this sort of technology has, not to mention the fact that it's protecting your systems and your company and anything that might be tucked away on that system that's super valuable and proprietary. So all of it.
I worked as an admin where we had really tight change control, and you wanted to make a setting change. You had to submit for change control, and then you wait for the change control meeting where they'd review it, and and that was great from a process standpoint. But again, if I was trying to do something malicious, they had no way of stopping me from doing it. Right? It was purely.
What are you going to do? Submit a ticket? Hi, I'm an attacker, and I would like to delete all your data. Do you approve? That's
exactly it. So that's the this is enforcing that process at the ONTAP level, which I think is really brilliant. Right? Is a great way of protecting it. Now you have to keep things like automation in mind because it can seriously inhibit if you're doing like high levels of automation of deleting and creating and deleting volumes. But for sensitive data and customers that have those sort of concerns, it's a great feature.
Yeah, awesome stuff. I know we're at time. We're going to go a little bit over here, but we can't get out of here without talking about FlexCache Writeback. And I feel like this is another one that we could probably spend an hour talking about on its own. Talk to me about the evolution of FlexCache and how what we're doing now. I know this is more or less a GA announcement from a prior tech preview, but 9.15 this for me as far as what it means to the listeners.
So what it means, FlexCache is, the great thing about there's full circle for you, Nick. When we talk about how great it is that ONTAP's everywhere, the fact that wherever you have ONTAP, I can create a volume of data and do a sparse cache. What I mean by that is I can keep my data at one location where I have all my data protection and backup protection strategy there. And yet for remote users, whether that may be in the cloud or halfway around the world, I can drop a sparse cache and read accelerate any files for them. So when they do reads, it feels local. It's a fast open. It's a fast access. Historically, we've always had write around, which means that any of those locations, they are rewritable when you have them locally, but any writes get ingested by the local cache system. They then get written back to the origin, and then they get acknowledged. So the writes always incur the WAN penalty of going across the WAN, all writes. Which if you're just kind of closing a file and writing it once, that's fine. I don't really care that the app took a few seconds to write. But if I'm working with like a movie file or a CAD CAM file where I'm constantly sort of changing and evolving that and it's doing automatic saves regularly to that file, and it's a big, say it's a gig file or 5 gig file, that's going to be really painful of sending every time it does a little change or a save, you have to incur that WAN. So what FlexCache Writeback allows you to do is the ability to say, hey, I'm actually going to let these big files write locally to the cache site and acknowledge it then. So the app feels like it has local write acceleration. And then I asynchronously pull that back to the origin. But we do that in a really unique way that still ensures immediate consistency across the whole ecosphere. So it doesn't matter if somebody tries to read that file somewhere else, we will make sure that any writes that are in the cache are actually synced back before they read it. That all files say immediately consistent regardless of where you come in from it. So that's its sweet spot is particularly if I need read-write access to a large file, and I'm going across a high WAN bandwidth, that's where this this technology absolutely shines.
Well, you also made the great the use case for movie editing. If you're working with big movie files, for those unaware, like I'm sure people know by now that there's always multiple departments working on a film. There's the sound designers that are putting in sound effects and music, and then there's the actual editors themselves. There's the compositors and people doing VFX, and then there's there's probably maybe 10 different associate editors that are stitching timelines together, all using the same raw footage. And I look at this for a movie studio or a post-production house, as going, this is, especially in the pandemic era, right, and the remote era that we're in now, like, this is a godsend for people that do that kind of work that's collaborative, that requires one source of truth in a way. I can't get my head around the physics of it. Like that's the part for me. Like I can't make this make sense in my head when it comes to just the nature of the physics of it, because you can only move data so fast depending on all of this stuff. Like, is it all coming from the same source, from the same place, and it's all writing back to the same place eventually? Is this an eventually consistent sort of, like, that's where I struggle with really getting my head around the write back nature of this.
The analogy I use, I don't know if it's a good one, but have you ever been in a team meeting or something where somebody, to prevent everybody talking at the same time, somebody has the talk stick?
Yeah.
That's how this works, right? Is if you want to write to a file, you got to get the talk stick, and the
Okay.
origin manages that, right? So basically, essentially, is if you want to write to this file, you get the talk stick. Somebody else then goes, I want to talk. They put their hand up. You go, you done with the talk stick? Great, give me the talk stick back. And then so it is. That's how that consistency around is it's passing that permission stick around to who's actually allowed to talk to the file at a given time.
I wasn't the only one thinking that, and I think you just answered it, but Alex also just threw it into the chat on YouTube. There's your answer, Alex.
I think I just answered it. Yes,
you got to get the talk stick. That's a T-shirt if I ever saw one.
Yeah. So no, there's no risk of collision, because you have to first get that talk stick. So getting that does involve going across the WAN. So your first write does have WAN latency, because I need to get the talk stick. Once I have it, then all the writes can stay local as long as I maintain that write delegation.
It's the conch from Lord of the Flies. You have to have the conch.
That's exactly. You have permission.
If you know, right? All right. Before we get out of here, anything else about FlexCache that we need to go over? I feel like we're not doing it a justice because it's here at the end, but you kind of just nailed it.
The movie house is a perfect use case. Engineering
Yeah.
is another perfect use case.
Yeah.
Another one we're seeing of it is even just like data pipelines. In other words, hey, I work with my files on-prem in one app, and then I have a cloud service work with that same data, and that cloud service needs read-write. Like, it needs to have high performance. That's the idea is, but they don't happen at the same time. This is another perfect use case where the data lives indefinitely on-prem or in the cloud, vice versa. But then on the opposite side, I have local performance, because it's highly performant for that. Now, again, it's not on first write, but it's when I have the subsequent writes on a given file that it actually shines. So, it's not just media. It doesn't have to be long distance, but it's a way of eliminating a lot of that WAN latency that creeps in.
I can see AI use cases with this. I can see tier 1 application use cases with this. Like you said, data pipelines for things like upstream database workloads, API workloads, that driven workloads. There's so many use cases that could take advantage of something like this. And if you have one, you probably know where you could take advantage of something like this. It's very easy for like user shares across multiple remote sites. If you're sharing departmental shares and everybody has to share a bunch of stuff, you just got to get the talking stick. You got to get the conch.
You got to get the conch.
Right? So that's.
I'm gonna go find a conch, because I use that a lot. I'm gonna go get one so I can actually physically have a conch.
There you go. Last but certainly not least, and we got a couple of last minute questions. Just going over kind of the QA and stability and the ongoing hardening and things of that nature that go into the general release cycle of ONTAP is constantly impressive. I wanted to give you a chance to go through some of these and Maybe shout out any of the engineers that worked on this kind of stuff. I know you love doing that.
Oh man, yeah, the engineering teams are huge. I hate to call it any one. I will say actually, on the closing off the FlexCache, Elliot, our friend Elliot Ecton, the TME for FlexCache, is working on an upgrade to the TR for that. That'll be a huge TR. So watch for that when that's being published. We'll share with that once that's out. A few things on 9.15 that we did that are again not feature related, but in one we're doing a bunch of things both within ONTAP and also in the ecosystem around ONTAP around making upgrades easier. The easier we can make upgrades and the safer we can make upgrades, the more chance customers will upgrade. And the more you upgrade, again, it's all goodness, right? You're always getting more performance every upgrade you do. Now you're getting more storage efficiency. We all do all the security fixes. It's always better to stay closer to the front end of ONTAP. But we acknowledge there's things that we can do better. And for example, in 9.15, one of the things we're doing is reducing the number of potential reboots. So if I did an ONTAP upgrade, there could be as many as three reboots, right? We do one reboot, and if there's new firmware or BIOS for the system, that could be one reboot to apply that. Then we'll reboot again, and we'll update firmware in any of the I/O cards. And we do another reboot and actually upgrade ONTAP. They're all automatic, but every time you do that, it takes some time. Right? Yeah. And so the whole time you're in that cycle, you're in that non-HA configuration. And so 9.15 reduces that down to 2 at most reboots, and we're looking to keep pushing that down. Hopefully, a single reboot to apply all firmware, all BIOS, all ONTAP, all in one shot.
Nice.
You'll see some improved tools and advisory and a better progress bar and time estimations, things like that. There's a ton of things we're going to do to make ONTAP upgrades a heck of a lot easier.
I noticed there was a bullet on here that I wanted to ask you about specifically. We've kind of been hung on this 12 node for SAN, 24 node for NAS thing for about a decade now. Really since the birth of clustered ONTAP. Are we ever going to exceed that? And is that an ONTAP? I don't want to call it an artificial limit, but is that when are we going to take the leash off and sort of go crazy and maybe throw up a 200 node cluster?
It's kind of an artificial limit. The reason we haven't really pushed it is because at the same time, in that same window, again, individual nodes have gotten faster. Now we've got so much faster hardware that's going in. We just look at the number of systems that are sitting at 12 node or 24 node, and it's just really not that many systems out there. Now, the customers that are sitting on those limits, we have helped them do upgrades to burst, 24 to 26 to facilitate a tech refresh, or 12 to, that can be done.
Sure.
But generally, you get the way that the nature of ONTAP, you generally don't need that many nodes, and as you get more nodes, the intercommunication just gets busier, right? And so there is sort of a, there's just not really seeing a real strong need to go to like a 200 node cluster when we can do the same thing with 12 bigger nodes or 24 bigger nodes. So that's, but it is sort of an artificial limit. There's no hard limit to that. If we needed to, if we suddenly saw a bunch of people go, hey, your 24 node cluster, whatever goofiness that is from a, 5-6 million IOPS, whatever that is, I need bigger than that. Let's talk. We can make that happen if you need more.
There's two things happening in the industry right now that made me ask that question. One of them, NetApp released a new modular chassis last week called the A1K that is screaming redonkulous fast.
Yep.
Right? Single node, but it's still HA paired construct, but it's done over the cluster switch, over 100 gig. I'm assuming at some point we'll see that advance to 400 gig. And I ask that in mind of AI. I can see a world where we're doing model training with multiple exabytes of data. And we're going to need systems that not only can perform at that screaming fast level to be able to process data at those speeds, but the sheer amount of data.
Yep.
The magnitude and the gravity of the amount of data that we're about to see. We saw an upswing of this in 2010-ish, plus or minus, where we saw this explosion of data. I think we're about to 10x that. My personal, not speaking for NetApp, my personal hypothesis there. I think we're about to at least 10x that. Because as soon as all of these GenAI products that are hitting the market out there. There are hundreds, if not thousands of them doing automatic generation of videos and text and all this stuff. And that's just the sliver of the pinky of what this thing's capable of. I think once we truly unleash the horsepower of what specifically generative AI, it's called generative AI because it generates things that are data. So when we have something that can generate all of this stuff, it's going to generate like it doesn't have any limits on storage. And I think we're going to see companies begin to really unleash that, and we're going to need systems like the A1K stacked maybe to 100 nodes to handle both the capacity and the performance requirements of that kind of stuff. Because I don't think we have any idea of what's coming. At the scale of it.
Well, we may not, but we think we have an idea, and
we think we do. But I'm saying I think it's going to hit us in the face.
Well, I think we're like I said, we're making big bets. We've made a big bet. So future episode plug. We'll come back and talk about what we're going to do for generative AI.
Heck yeah. I know we got some guys that want to get on here. I've been talking to Joseb and all of that kind of good stuff. I had one couple quick questions before we get out of here. Philippe asked, any timeline for 9.15 to be available at our preferred public cloud providers, either via CVO or native first party? Like, what's the lag time typically on upgrades for ONTAP, whether it's the first party or, the ability to spin up CVO through BlueXP?
Yeah, so 15.1 is available as a release candidate right now. Again, we're a bit fluid about how we move that to GA. It's based on adoption and ramp up, and but it's usually a 6 to 8 window when you can kind of see it. Once we and then each of the individual, as far as first party, so CVO we have some control of, but first party that's entirely up to the cloud vendors, right? So it's they have now they tend to be fairly aggressive on their versions, but it is entirely their discretion about when they want to move to a new version. But it's usually in the months range. It's not years. They usually stay pretty close to it.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for the question. I've been holding on to this one he asked it over in Discord. Sorry for making you wait so long, Troy. It goes back to QAT. How does that work with Fabric Pool? How does ONTAP handle compression and stuff like that, more advanced compression scenarios, and when you're doing things like your automated tier-offs to Storage Grid and Fabric Pool and things like that?
Yeah, great question. It's all in line. So if we're sending things to Fabric Pool, as they're ingested, they'll get the additional compression of QAT. When I said you compress existing data, we will not be rewarming data just to compression, right? That would have, if you're sending to a public cloud, that would be a lot of egress costs. We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So if the data is already been tiered off using Fabric Pool, it'll stay tiered off. Now, if the data is brought back or is changed on new writes, any new data that's coming in that case, you'll get the new compression, and that is preserved when you send it off to the cold tier. So in those cases, the Fabric Pool, we're not going to rewarm any cold data just to compress it. That would be rather expensive.
Yeah, I think it would just reprocess it, Troy, when it comes back. So hopefully that answers your question, and if not, let us know in Discord. Last one from Alex here from YouTube says, for active-active SnapMirror, I understood the prereq is SAN LUN. The question is whether that LUN can be hosted off of FAS AFF or only on the ASA.
So it can be FAS AFF or ASA, just as you said there. It just can't be both. So what I mean by that is you can have ASA to ASA, you can have AFF to AFF, AFF to FAS even, A series to C series, no problem. The only two streams you cannot cross is ASA to AFF because your pathing is so different between the two of them. So that's the only two, you don't want to cross the streams there.
Do you see a world where that changes?
No.
Never rule anything out, I guess. Never say never.
Never say never. Not in any time soon. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
It's a challenge just because you're presenting the same LUN potentially to the same host. You wouldn't want to say which pathing profile do you pick then? Well, in one side it's doing active-active, and the other side it's doing active-passive pathing. It's too hard to kind of set a preferred path for the actual host. So.
Well, cool. Keith, thank you so much for all the time today, man. It's always a pleasure to hang out and rap with you for an hour here and there a few times a year to go over some of all of the latest updates of everything that we talk about with these shows. I genuinely enjoy having this time to spend with you and go over these things. I'm going to look back. I'm going to read back through, I'm going to watch this back and look for any things that we can call out, and maybe we'll do some further discussion on some of the things now that we're past the launch and we're getting out there. Official GA date for 9.15, do we have that? Is it out there already?
The RC is, right, and as I said, our GA is based on number of customers that adopt it, early quality that we see, number of systems. There's a number of metrics that factor that in. So we don't have an official GA date. It's typically 6 to 8 weeks. So I would early July would probably be your GA date. Is a best hazard, I guess.
There you go. I think everybody waits till Service Pack 2 anyway. So.
Yeah, that too. That's more of an August thing, maybe, or September. But yeah.
Oh, God. All right. Well, thank you so much, Keith, for hanging out with me again. And we'll see you next time for sure.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Nick.
All right. Take care. All right, guys. There you go. Mr. Keith Aasen once again joining the show here with another big, just huge, massive show that I even need to go back and watch back through just to understand all of the stuff that went on there. We have lots coming up for you guys. I teased it earlier in the show. We have lots of shows booked. To keep up with those, come join us in Discord. That's where you want to be. We put each of these episodes up as events, and as we generate the graphics and the descriptions and all that stuff, you'll see them as upcoming streams on the NetApp YouTube channel. So you can subscribe to us over on YouTube or come join us in the community, and you'll see the announcements and things like that happening in real time as we put them up. So June 5th, mark your calendars. Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. We've got Chris Luth and Scott Bell coming in, going over the new A-series platforms, the A70, A90, A1K, and all the gooey, geeky hardware nerd details that we're going to get into with that one. That one's going to be fun. Let's see, what else we got? We got Matt Trudwin coming back in, talk about Cyber Vault and some of the things we hinted at today around ARP and dynamic authorization. All of that stuff we've got upcoming for you guys. And the big one, beep, 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 beep. We have confirmation that Mr. Duncan Moore will finally be joining us here on the show to go over the latest and greatest with Storage Grid. Yes, somehow we made it 18 months doing this show without talking about Storage Grid. Damn it, I'm going to fix that. So I love Storage Grid. I can't wait to geek out about it. I hope you guys are excited about that one. But we are going to get that booked very soon, sometime within the next 1 to 2 months, but depending on schedules and things like that. So I'm very excited about the upcoming schedule here. Reminder, in case you missed it, last week, registration for Insights open. The cheapest, lowest prices you're ever going to get on it are active now. So head over to insight.netapp.com. Make sure you get registered, all that stuff. I think that's the right website we're sending people to. But registration is open for Insight. You can now register for it. It is September 23rd this year. You're going to hear me harp on this every week because typically we do it at the end of October. It is at the end of September this year. And I don't know about ongoing years, but you will see. Yes, registration is open for Insight. And yes, we are less than 5 months away. So it's coming up pretty quick, guys. Don't be one of those that looks up at the end of August and you haven't registered yet, because you'll have the most expensive price and you'll have like no time to prepare for it. Get your hotels and your flights booked now. Get all of that stuff taken care of, because it's only going to get more and more expensive. And you know you want to be here. If you were at last year's show, shout it out in Discord. Tell everybody how amazing the expo was. All the sessions were fantastic. It was great to see everybody again after 4 long years. So we're doing it even bigger this year. So get registered. We'll see you at Insight at the end of September. And we'll see you guys here on the show next week. But until then, my name's Nick Howell. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.